It's no secret that all, if not most, have watched or read a piece of fiction only to eventually find yourself double backing to recall of a conflict or interaction. You may just pick up on some things that you might not have otherwise noticed the first time around. For some, this can make for memorable stories, and for others, even be so much as life-changing. If there's something we're all aware of, it's that Tite Kubo loves to experiment with characters, and by his words from an answered question via Club Outside, he finds it enjoyable to write in such a way as to leave questions unanswered. As part of his writing, there's one character in conflict that stands out most apart from others within Bleach's Soul Society arc. That said, this exchange happens to involve Soi Fon and Yoruichi. When going back to revisit the very first interaction between these two, there happen to pose some interesting paradigms. Of course, this isn't to say that there aren't other characters or interactions that hold significant weight in their own right. This just happens to be one exchange that when going back with a fine-tooth comb, one could still pick up on some things. Whether that be questions that may surface from new information given, character actions, or even words used by said characters, some of which might even reshape the way you perceive one or both characters. Though first to truly understand this interaction, it's imperative that we understand some context or history. The history between these two spans as far back as when Yoruichi was once captain of the 2nd Division. Having witnessed this, a young Soi Fon was not only enamored by this feat, but to the point where she'd seen Yoruichi as both a goddess and worthy of worship. Eventually, Soi Fon would go on to enlist in the Guard Corps. 7 years after joining, she would then be promoted to the commander's personal guard squad. This position would report directly to the commander of the Omnitsukido, or aka Yoruichi, thereby which she vowed to devote body and soul to protect Yoruichi by any means necessary. A part of this backstory is also exclusively anime only. In episode 57, Soi Fon and Yoruichi go out to scout for hollows until suddenly Soi Fon is captured by one. Being moments from death, Yoruichi swiftly saves her while defeating the hollow in the process. That night, she finds a disappointed Soi Fon training in private. At this time, Soi Fon is actually conflicted due to having been saved by Yoruichi, when the roles should really be reversed and that Soi Fon should be protecting her instead. Having felt this way, Yoruichi then goes on to empathize with Soi Fon and offers some reassurance. Yoruichi would then make a promise to Soi Fon that she would forever be able to protect her. In this moment lies a catalyst that would eventually have to be confronted years later. One day, due to unforeseen events involving Kisuke Urahara, Yoruichi would then go missing. I'm sure some are aware of what happened, but bear with me. This was a very traumatic experience for Soi Fon, seeing as though the one and only person she looked up to in her eyes would betray her. So that essentially concludes the history between these two. Fast forward years later, during an invasion set out to liberate Rukia, we have a standoff between an exiled commander and a vengeful protege. Firstly, it'd be hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some sort of excitement from Soi Fon seeing her master after so many years. And to really emphasize that, that's 1 century. After so many years of dwelling within her own thoughts, one can't imagine what she might have been thinking. And that's one of the many things that stands out. To the contrary, it makes one wonder what Yoruichi might have thought, and just how much it could have negatively impacted Soi Fon. So earlier I spoke of questions that may surface. In this moment, it also becomes evident that these characters are written in such a way that would make one question alternative timelines that would be antithetical to their present. Case in point, having been a fugitive, would Yoruichi bringing Soi Fon along with her had caused unforeseen complications? And if so, what would such adversity be? Might Yoruichi had been able to train Soi Fon to a point where she'd either match or eclipse her current strength as a captain? And lastly, could either of these two live with themselves knowing that they killed the very same person they once cared for? Now, these questions might not be shared universally, though as it relates to respective characters makes one curious to continue following along. So apart from the relationship spectacle between these two, there's many great moments within this fight. For some, conflict tends to get dull after a while, but when buried with great storytelling and compelling character moments, well then, it helps in keeping one further engaged. The conflict between these two best exemplify this. Within this sequence we get an idea of just how lethal both speed and hand-to-hand combat is, otherwise known as Shunpo and Hakuda. This is one of many things that makes for a great fight. You may even find that there may be a point where a character's actions are ambiguous. For example, we reach a part in their fight where Soi Fon uses her Shikai. Shortly after, she then marks Yoruichi once with a Hamonka, or Death Crest. In this very moment, it could simply be interpreted as, well, a death crest, or as both a literal and symbolic stain. It is right here where the mark has a double meaning, in such a way that it serves as a consequence for Yoruichi's actions, even if unintentional. And lastly that, well, it could simply be interpreted as a death crest, or as both a literal and symbolic stain. In such a way that it serves as a consequence for Yoruichi's actions, even if unintentional. And lastly that, well, it could simply be interpreted as, well, a death crest, or as both a literal and symbolic stain. In such a way that it serves as a consequence for Yoruichi's actions, even if unintentional. Betrayal stings. These two are quite a unique pair within this arc, and it's evident by how this fight captures several elements all at once, with of course the aforementioned conflict, motive, tone, and lastly, growth. One may even go as far as to say that Soi Fon is one of the more relatable captains. It may be safe to say that most can attest to being betrayed at some point, and it's this experience that changes us. For some, the worst, others, the contrary. Words are potent and by far one of the most advanced tools that we possess. Just in how we speak can ignite expressions that are at times otherworldly. How a character can show sorrow, ire, or even glee. There are near boundless ways of conveying such emotions, be it choice of words in its delivery, perception in the eyes of themselves, or even others. All can tell us the finer points of who the character is. This is best portrayed at the latter end of the fight, when Soi Fon is vanquished, having been stopped and immediately coming to realization that everything she's worked up to in this very moment has been to no avail. It's in this moment that we see a true version of Soi Fon, one that is unveiled from a cloak of aversion. We learn of and finally get the question of it all, and that is, why? Within the span of a century, Soi Fon never sought to expunge Yoruichi. Rather, she was searching for an answer as to why exactly Yoruichi left and never took her along. The last two panels in chapter 159 captures elements and emotions that would be akin to the old adage of being worth 1,000 words. This was never a fight simply to be seen as the master having the capability to easily outclass their student, rather than it is a display of results of unexpected events. Both are victims of circumstance. Within writing, once characters are established, there's a likelihood that for whatever reason, they may just start going at it. What's great is that after establishing characters, it's as though Kubo just sits back hands free and sees what paths those characters may take. What's more is that Kubo usually doesn't intend to create personality before drawing, and it's only then that he'll know which side of them is strong and what's weak. Soi Fon is a character within Bleach most overlooked due to her power, or what would be deemed as having a petulant nature. And while one can't expect to change the minds of many, there's certainly more to Soi Fon than what is otherwise discerned. While never explicitly shown, it would have been nice if we'd actually gotten a chance to see these two rectify. Rather more so, the two expressing verbal remorse. Really, the only conjecture is that this would have happened off-screen or off-panel, which I suppose only makes sense. In fact, the only time we get a hint of this possibly happening is in episode 61. If going by the assumption that they would have rectified, which is safe to say they did, the beauty is that, in spite of all that's happened, even without Yoruichi possessing her captain and commander status, she still has that overprotective bodyguard by her side. It only further validates the loyalty Soi Fon has for Yoruichi despite her banishment. It's quite sweet. What's more is seeing just how far these two characters have come, and seeing what came of their confrontation. From this point onward, the interactions between these two that are shown are relatively limited. If excluding movies or filler, which most would debate whether these interactions are canon, there is of course novels and data books, though mostly alluding to the Bleach Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 2 novel. Within chapter 11 of this novel, Yoruichi actually acknowledges that Soi Fon has an obsession whenever something involves her, to which Soi Fon responds by thanking Yoruichi for such a comment. It's very accurate, and a pretty good laugh. For those who've kept up with Thousand Year Blood War, there is however a time where we get a pseudo-interaction, and that's through a vicarious reaction from Yoruichi's brother Yushiro. Aside from that, that's really it. Nonetheless, it's always nice seeing these two characters interact, much like the moment we see Soi Fon and Yoruichi working together in battle during Fade to Black. A little unfortunate that we don't get to see more moments like this outside of movies. Also, I have to say this, Soi Fon is pretty much the embodiment of every Yoruichi fan.
Wearing clothes is so uncomfortable. Soi Fon.
You can't really blame her. So of course this was a conflict occurring much earlier on in the series, and while archaic, it's always nice going back to reminisce on older chapters and episodes. By the way, I hope you've all been enjoying the Bleach Thousand Year Blood War anime. Perhaps it'll be something that I cover later on in the future. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and stick around for future content. For right now, that's all I have for you. Take care, and I'll see you all next time.